Good morning. We are in Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3, reviewing the conclusion of this Hemshech, the bottom of page 1443. So one of the subplots has been concluded, more or less, with the understanding that Shema is the central mitzvah, if you wish, what he called Klolus Kol HaMitzvahs, because it personifies, it encompasses the very essence of all mitzvahs, which is liyachid, kutshabrichu, v'shchinta, to connect and unite, Hashem echad, like he said, mamata lamayla, mamayla lamata, Atzmus, the true reality, to the point that all of existence is aware of this highest state of completely beyond all of existence and even beyond the Oyr, like we learned. And even Oyr also comes to appreciate its infinite distance from the divine. And that appreciation actually is what unites them, because you really understand God on God's terms, not just on our terms, as we discussed at length. And the final piece we learned was the tying it all together after explaining how the Eina Reich Lecha Be'elam Hazeh teaches us that also Oyr comes to appreciate the Eina Reich Lecha, what he calls the bitl of Ein Oid. We learned, talked about the different levels of bitl. Ein Zulasecha, Efes Biltecha, Ein Deimelach, and Eina Reich Lecha. So then he went back and said, V'nimtze, sheyesh b'krishma chinis halah v'amshachas. So we find in Krishma there's both halah, the elevation going upward all the way to the etzem, to Atzmus Ein Sof, through hamayich be'echad, the extended contemplation on Achdus Hashem as we climb from the bottom up, and the same thing, hamshacha mamayla lamata, amlichte lamayla lamata, and bringing down those highest levels of Atzmus into existence. And this concludes the fact that Shema has 248 words, correspond to the Shir Kema, the entire structure of the divine structure of the Ramach Evarim, the Malka Kadisha, or Ramach Evarim, the Malka, I should say, the 248 organs of the king in the Moshel. And just like mitzvahs do it in a pratistic way, each mitzvah, like mitzvah tefillin, draws down the meichim from above. And that's for the Adam Lamata. And the Adam Lamayla, it draws down from Keser. And that way, all the way up to the highest level. So Shema does this, like he said, a mitzvah does it in a specific way, Shema does it b'chlolos. What a mitzvah does b'pratis, like they call mitzvah b'frat, nasa de krishma b'chlal. Additionally, the amshacha that comes through mitzvahs is dafka through the halah, the elevation of Shema. And all this is actualized through Neshamas Yisrael, who are mushrish and Atzmus. So Neshamas Yisrael through mitzvahs, and in general through the Aveda of Shema, they come l'shtaba begufin the Malka, to be bound and joined and connected to the Gufa of Malka. And as was posted, Yitzchak posted, we were talking about the root of the word l'shtaba, so I'm glad to say that bound was the right word. You know, there are a few other words that it's connected to. But that's what the neshamas do. Mishtabas of Guf and the Malka, the level of Kutchabrichu, Mahus v'Atzmus, Ayin Sav, that's higher than Eir v'Gili, than any revelation. And as Dafki Yechelis Neshamas Yisrael, because they're rooted in Atzmus, like we learned earlier, that's where they have this power to connect to the very Guf of Malka, Atzmus Ein Sof. But we see also how it manifests in the 248, the structural elements of the Evarim, but this is in a general sense through Shema. And the mitzvahs, each mitzvah does it more specifically in each particular Ever, each particular organ as it corresponds to its respective mitzvah. Okay. So that concludes the paragraph, and now we shall continue. So he goes back now Remember, a lot of this is based on a mimer called Yeseva Venhu. It's a mimer of the Alter Rebbe that the Rebbe Rashab began to quote. Let me go back. He quoted with the Ishen Enei. Takes us back to find it right here. Yeah, page 1408. We're now on 1443. We're talking about a good 35 pages. So, as we know, Ayin Beis is one big so-called jigsaw puzzle of many different pieces, moving pieces. And there are many Maimorim that Rebbe Rashab is working with here. Of course, Hamagbi L'Sheves is maybe the most central one in this whole end of Ayin Beis, but also the Maimer Ve'enenu Me'ires, and now the Maimer Yeseva Venhu, which talks a lot about the Neshamas and Malachim, the difference between Ishin Einai, the pupil of the eye, which is the Neshamas, and Einei Hashem, which is the Malachim. And we learned that the Malachim are a siyua, like the cosmic digestive system. They are the distributors, the cosmic distributors of all the Hamshachas and the Halas. So now he's going back to that. Now, if you recall, this whole section we just finished learning about Shema and Achdus and the Neshamas came after we discussed the Maila of Neshamas over Malachim. And I take you back to page now 1434 and 1435. So now he goes back to the Maimon Yosef Avenu, because now comes back to the original question. Okay, even though we already answered, but the question really is, if Neshamas Yisrael are rooted at such a high level, what do they need Malachim for? Why do we need Birchus Yetzer before Shema that talks about Kodesh, 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 the Srafim, the Chayes HaKodesh, the Eifanim, the different levels of Malachim? Why do we need to daven in our prayer, have to talk about the passion and the Ava V'yira of the Malachim? So earlier he said is because from there comes the Ava V'yira, they guide and they supervise and transmit the Ava V'yira into Neshamas. So he's going to go back to that theme right now, but he's going to quote the question from the Maimon Yosef Avenu very directly. That's what we're going to learn now. So just to give for the structural purposes where we're headed right now, is we're still all in the discussion of Neshamas, and they come down below and they need a siyua, light from outside, like the eye that cannot see in the dark. And that's why we need Torah and Ner Mitzvah, and we need Malachim, and we need Einei Ha'eda, the leaders. But he's going to come back ultimately. The goal of it all is to empower Neshamas to reach their source in Atzmus. But to do that, we need to go through these steps. So the next section, starting here from the bottom of 1443, is going to go for a while, quite a while, till let me just tell you where it is, all the way. Well, first there'll be a whole discussion about the Neshamas and Malachim till page 1454, and then he continues even further after that, where he's going to connect it back to the ayin, to the eye. Like I said, the eyesight is a very central theme here. And then he's going to go back to the fact that in Golus, Neshamas need this more than ever. Even though Neshamas need the help of Malachim all the time, but especially in Golus. And then he's going to go back and say, on the other hand, it's dafka when the Neshama comes down below, Shcheirani, in a dark world, that allows it to access the highest levels of Atzmus. And then finally, on page 1463, he's going to return to the Maimer HaMagbi L'Sheves about Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom and Ner Mitzvah V'Torah, and that will lead us into the conclusion of Ayin Beis, the three levels of Yichud, and the unification, the two levels of Yichud, and the unification of the two levels. And with that, he's going to conclude Ayin Beis, but now we're informed by the other Maimorim that can help us understand the picture. So that's the lay of the land where we go from here. So briefly, going to go back now to angels, angels and souls, explain the role of angels, especially in time of Golus. Then explain how Dafka, when neshamas come down in the darkest place with the support of angels and malachim and Torah and the Einei Ha'eda and so on, they are able to elevate to the highest levels. Like we learned about that, Dafka through the Nefesh Habamis will become the shemen, the oil that creates the fire and the flame. And then I'll take us back to the eyesight, the muscle of the eye in the vessel, and the eye in Etzem HaNefesh that does not need outside light. And then finally back to Magbil Sheves Maimar about the difference between Ner Hashem Nishma Sodom, Ner Mitzvah, Torah though he doesn't conclude it all, but that he's going to be in the middle of that. That's where the end of Hemshech Ayin Beis will be. But at that point, we will then go back to all the Maimarim that we've learned, and hopefully I'll have finished my essay by then as well. And we have all the different pieces, be able to connect it all back to the original theme, which is ultimately how Torah Mamayla Lamata, empowers the neshama and its Mamata Lamayla Aveda to create the ultimate seamless unity from both Mamata Lamayla and Mamayla Lamata. And then there's more to say, of course, in connecting it to the whole theme of the whole Hemshech. But that I'll reserve for later. I don't want to overwhelm it right now, but that's the direction where we're headed here. Okay. So 3 lines from the bottom of page 1443. We'll continue now with a question. Achine yesh lahavin. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Now, however, we have to understand. Being that we just discussed that through Shema, the contemplation of Hashem Echad, through that, close Neshamas Yisrael, which means the general body and all of Neshamas Yisrael, reach the point of the Sachid, the Guf and the Malka, to unite with the very Guf of the Melech, not just his garments, and not just his extension, not just his Oyer Vigilui, but the very body. Now, obviously, body here is a moshel, but it would be like, in other words, you're not just connecting to the king's teachings or the king's directives or the king's expressions. You're embracing the very king himself, his Evarim, like in the moshel. His Evarim, you're embracing him like you would hug a king. So that's Mamash Atzmus Ein Sof. That's what Neshamas Yisrael reached through Shema. The Gufa de Malka Mamash. He adds Mamash. So then the question is, Lama Tzrichim Yisrael lekabel Ava V'yira Ma Malachim. So why do they have to receive Ava V'yira from the Malachim? Kamei B'Kedushas Yetzer, like we say in the introduction before Shema, in the Kedushas Yetzer, Kadosh Kadosh, Shalifnei Krishma Kamei is barely ill. Like we learned earlier on page 1434, that the neshamas need the Amshach of the Ava V'yira Malachim, that in turn, so-called ignites and inspires their Ava V'yira. But why do you need that? We just explained that we can directly connect, just like through Tefillin, we connect to the Moichin of the Melech, like we said. So Shema is Klolos Kol HaMitzvahs, connects you to the whole Guf of the Melech directly. Why do we need an additional support, an additional element of the Malach? As I said, this question was answered overall, but here he's explicitly spelling it out, and the language is actually from the Maimer Yosef Avenu of the Alter Rebbe, the one I mentioned before, Yosef Avenu, the Maimer. If you want to, I think I gave the source for the Maimer. It's a Maimer from Tovkuf Samach Zayin. The Alter Rebbe said it's Shabbos Shuvah or also Sukkot that year. Tovkuf Samach Zayin. Tovkuf Samach Zayin is the equivalent of 1806. Yeah, 1806. Yeah. That's when the Alter Rebbe said it. And there's the Tzemach Tzedek has a gloss and commentary on it. And that's what this is based on. So this language we just read is straight from that Maimer. The question is an obvious question. Hari hamalachim einu mekablim rak m'bchinas dibur bavad. Malachim, we learned, only receive from the level of dibur, of God's speech. We learn now that's far deeper than dibur, even deeper than machshav. It's all the way to the guf hamelach canal. So since malachim are such lower level of Ava v'yira, why do we need them? Why does Neshamas Yisrael need to receive Ava v'yira from the malachim? That's the question he's asking here. Next page. 1444, he's going to answer the question. Let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. He's going to answer, but just based on everything I just said, any questions? Okay, so next page, 1444. Acha inyan hu. That's classic way Chassidus answers a question. I pointed out many times in Tanya too. He doesn't say, Hine hateretz, or Hine hatshuva, acha inyan. It's always discussing the whole inyan. Not a question answer. It's understanding the bigger picture, and that automatically will answer the question. So what's the inyan? The Neshamas Yisrael had a melubashim begufim, gashmim. We're not talking about Neshamas Yisrael as they are alone. If you're talking about Neshamas Yisrael as they're rooted in the highest levels, then yeah, they're rooted higher than everything. But we're talking about Neshamas Yisrael come down into gufim gashmim. And not just they come down, they're melubash. Hislapshus, not like in just passing through, like getting dressed and enclosed and manifesting within physical bodies. Shesharsham and those gufim gashmim have an effect on the neshama. So first of all, where do they come from? The root of the gufim. The root of the gufim are a very different place than the neshamas. A guf, even though we did learn a guf is ultimately a lakus, and L'Asad we will see that in a guf, and the guf will actually even sustain the soul, but that's not how a guf is initially. Initially, a guf is a concealed state. I mean, look at our bodies. The fact that it's rooted in Atzmus does not change the fact that in reality, its consciousness is not the divine consciousness. Like we learned in the Maimer HaMagbi, a guf and nefesh habamis are exclusively interested in their own needs and their own interests, self-interest, ego, materialism. So yes, they have a deeper root, but it's like Kalim. The Kalim may be rooted deeper than the Oyer, but the Poel, a Kali is a Kali, and the Oyer is a revelation. So the Gufim, where are they rooted from? They're Nimshach Menega Dasiya. So this is Klippas Nega of the world of Asiya. That's what creates the shell. Nega, Klippas Nega means the transparent or the radiant shell. So Nega is used as a word, even though Nega means radiant, but it's usually used in context of Klippas Nega. So after all the Eiris, as the energies, divine energies get more and more concealed, level by level, in Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya, ultimately in Asiya, Nega of Asiya is like the lowest levels where the energy is concealed, and that's where the Kalim, or I should say the Gufim, the bodies are rooted in. Shemakab, okay. We'll go slowly here. So B'mela, the neshamas are now inside of bodies. Those bodies are concealers. And that's where the neshamas are going to need help. So neshama itself, if it was a pure soul as it's rooted in the highest levels, that's a whole different story. But we're not talking about that level. As a matter of fact, that's not even the kavanah. The kavanah is that neshama should come down below and do our avodah. You know, from the and that's where the malachim play a central role, as we'll learn now. So now this level of asiya of nega, I need to explain a bit more about it before I read on, because it's very brief here. But this is something that shouldn't be new to any of you, because we have discussed this. To remember that with all the discussion of the highest levels rooted in Atzmus, bottom line is, after the tzimtzum, the concealments begin to take real effect. They conceal the divine energy. So of course, in the higher worlds, there's Elikus remains Begoli, but as it evolves, or you could say devolves, as it continues the Seder Shtalshelus, the progression of the hierarchy, lower and lower, the Oyer becomes more concealed, the containers become more dominant. In Atzilus, is still a full balance. It's a divine world, but it's a structure. In Bria, the concealment gets deeper. That's why it's Baruch Cheshach. It's a concealed state. Yitzir even more so, and then Nasi even more so. So what's happening is that the Eidos are becoming more concealed. The containers are becoming more prominent. I always give the example of a development of a fetus. So in the beginning, at the point of conception, it's one cell. So the Gashmi the Keli is very negligible. All the energy, the entire life of that child and that adult is all concentrated in one cell. Then the cell splits into two. So it's like two Kalim, into 4, into 8. Ultimately, it'll be 35 to 75 trillion cells, to the point that a body develops with all its structure. Yes, there's a neshama in there, but the neshama is now concealed in there. And the oil of the neshama has now been diffused, so to speak, or at least concealed, and it's what's dominant is the body. That doesn't mean we can't retrace the steps. That's the whole avodah that we do. But it's work. So the same idea, as the oiros of Elikus come down into Kalim, into each world, Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, same thing with the neshama. Like we say every morning, neshama shenasata bi taket tahirihi. But it doesn't stay there. That's Atzilus. Then Ata Barasa, Bria, Ata Yitzarta, Yitzira, Ata Nefachta bi. You instill it within me, Vayipach. That's Asiyah. Ata Meshamra Bikirbi, and you protect it within me. Why does it need protection? Because now the neshama is no longer in its pure, so-called spiritual oasis and environment of Atzilus. It's gone through Bria and Yitzira and Asiyah. And ultimately, the neshama then manifests inside a body. The body, in its own way, is, besides the neshama's yurida and it's going down, the body itself is created by the yeshus of the body. The very substance and physicality of the body is not coming from the soul. That comes from the kalim. And the kalim ultimately are like the shell. And the shell ultimately is called a klippa. A klippa is a concealer. And so it's true, like the Shalosh says, initially the shell is only a klippa shemer lepri. The whole purpose of the shell, an eggshell, a peel of an apple peel, an orange peel. I mean, every fruit and vegetable that has a peel, the purpose of the peel, the shell, is only, the husk is only to protect the fruit within. But ultimately, what happens when you come into this world? We sometimes forget there's a fruit inside the peel. That's when the problems begin. Materialism becomes divorced, or you can say the dissonance between materialism and spiritual energy within it. Matter and energy are now have some form of dissonance. And when that dissonance takes place, that's where klippa begins to take hold, because the whole purpose of the shell of this world was to protect and essentially encase the nitzutzi gedusha, the holy sparks of the soul of spirituality, and that's the purpose. But when you start worshiping and valuing the shell as more important than the fruit inside, that's called materialism. That, if you want, the anatomy of materialism is a shell that has gone rogue, basically. The shell that is no longer understanding that its whole purpose, money, material possessions, physical health, everything about this physical world, our bodies, everything, is really there only to reveal a deeper Gilead Likus. But as we know, it's a world called Elam Eloshin Helen Vahester, Cheshach Kaflim Mechupel Tachtenim, so it gets concealed and the klippas dominate. The goal, of course, is the bitter hanetzutzes, is to find and discover the sparks within and then separate them and elevate them, refine, and return them back to the source. That's called retracing the steps. But before that avodah, that's the world in which we live. So when you look at a guf, a body, in contrast to a soul, that's the guf. It's coming from the nega of asiyah, from the klippa of asiyah. It's still klippas nega. It's not shalosh klippas atmeis, which is far worse where there it completely conceals like a black hole, and you can't even see any light in it. In the nefesh, in the gufa nefesh habamis, you can see light. It just has its own agenda. It's its own yesh. It's its own ego. So now he's going to explain. Here's where the malachim come into play, because the malachim are the root of neged asiyah. So when the malachim demonstrate through their ava v'yira, it helps soften and weaken the klippa that originates from that level. And that in turn will help, of course, the neshama, as it says Krishma, to be able to also engage the body. That's briefly what he's going to be saying now in the next the next section, till the end of the paragraph. So that's where he's going with this. But that's why I wanted the whole longer introduction, because he doesn't spell out exactly this whole evolution of how the body becomes a body. But essentially, the body is essentially a product of the tzimtzum, a product of the kelim, the reshimu, and the containers, which in turn will ultimately devolve into klippas, which are also a container. At the end of the day, a shell, a husk, is a container. It's a container for the fruit within. But it's a container that no longer knows it's a container. That's the problem. In Atzilus, the kelim of Atzilus, you don't call them klippas. There you call them containers. A container that contains energy, like a cup of wine. Everyone knows the cup is there to hold the wine in it. But when the cup starts becoming an entity that's somewhat not conscious of the wine within it, or in this case, the kedusha, the alakus within it, that's when it begins to have its own agenda. When Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge, that's what happened. Up till that point, they were souls inside of bodies, living in a physical world, but they knew that all of it was all to serve God. Then they began a new agenda. The independent consciousness decided to go off the reservation, so to speak, start doing its own thing, instead of understanding that all of it is meant to align and integrate it with alakus, with the fruit within. The klippa, the shell, begin to have its own life. Like imagine musical notes. Instead of playing the music, each musical note decides to wander off and decide to do its own thing. Just to use some analogies for this. Or the words on the page of a book, instead of helping tell the narrative, each one decided, I'm going off on my own agenda, I have my own interests right now. So that's, in a way, a description of Olam Hazeh when it doesn't have direction and guidance, in very simple terms. So that's the gufim. So neshamas are now in gufim. It's nimshach meneged asiyah. But where's neged asiyah come from? At the end of the day, those kelim, they come from kelim from a higher level. So he says they're makabel, shemakablim mahamakove, the pnei aryeh pnei nesher. Just for the record, again, all this is literally word for word the Maimer Yosef Avenu of the Alter Rebbe. So you see how the Alter Rebbe's Maimer is very brief. That's why I'm elaborating, because he just says it like he relies that you know what it means. Like right, these two lines just nishach meneged asiyah, and it's mekabel from the Merkavah. If I didn't give any explanation, if you never learned this before, what does it even mean? That's why I'm elaborating. So where does Negav Asiyah come from? It comes from higher levels. It doesn't come from nowhere. The Nega, the Klippas Negav Asiyah comes from Yetzirah. And Yetzirah comes from Bria. And where's it rooted? In the Merkavah, which is, I believe here he means the world of Bria probably, the Pnei Aryeh Pnei Nesher. So the Merkavah, we're talking the Merkavah is the chariot that Yecheskel envisioned in his vision, in his prophecy. So he saw a Merkavah chariot and he said, I see four faces. It had four different, four faces, four facets. And what were the faces? One of them was Pnei Aryeh, the face of a lion. Another is Pnei Nesher, the face of an eagle. The other two is Pnei Shoyer, face of an ox, of an animal. And the fourth is Pnei Adam. So Chassidus, Kabbalah, Chassidus explained, these refer to four different levels of divine expression. Obviously, Pnei Adam is the highest, like the neshama, connected to the nefesh. But the other three are the root of animal. And we're talking now the guf and nefesh habamis. So where's the nefesh habamis rooted? He's going to explain is in Pnei, generally speaks, it's Pnei Shoyer. But in broader terms, it could be Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Nesher, because that's what he brings here. Kiyudua. And he explains. Kiyudua, as it's known, the Shedish Chayis HaEfes, the root of the Chayis of the energy of the oifus of the birds, who mepnei nesher, sheba Merkavah. It's from the face of the eagle. The eagle is considered like the king of the birds. The sheidish chayis, the chayis. And what's the root of the energy of animals in the world? Is mipnei Aryeh sheba Merkavah. Aryeh is the king, the melech sheba chayis, the king of the animals. The sheidish chayis habehemis. And what's the root of behemoths? Behemoths are not chayas, are more like the wild animals, the predators, the wild animals. Behemoths are more the docile animals, like the cattle. They come in p'chinas p'nei sheir. They come from the third face, the face of the sheir. Sheir is an animal, is a behemoth, an ox, a bull. Bottom line is, you have three different categories: birds, animals, behemoths, and cattle. And they are rooted in these three levels. Again, all this is Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, and now he continues. V'hine. So what does it have to do with the guf and the nefesh habamis? What does it have to do with the body and the animal soul? V'hine nefesh habamis shebegufim hagashmim. The animal soul that is inside of the physical bodies, where the neshama, the Pnei Adam, that rooted in Pnei Adam, comes into the bodies. What's the root of the animal soul? It's also called Behemoth. He says, Klula Mikol Hagimel Madregas. So here he spells out that it encompasses all three: Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Sheir, or Pnei Nesher. In other words, Behemoth here is not just Behemoth like Sheir, but it encompasses all three. Because in the Nefesh Habamis, we have all those features. He doesn't spell out what they are. Again, this is very brief. It's the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, and the Rebbe Rashab does not explain it. So I believe I explained it the first time we learned it, so I'm not going to go over it again. It's not so directly relevant, but suffice it to say, therefore, so now we're dealing with an animal, with a soul that enters inside of a body, which has a Nefesh Habamis, which is rooted in these three different faces of the Merkavah. Because in the Nefesh Habamis it has something from the world of Behema, from the level of Behema, and from the level of Chaya, which is more like a more predatory, a more wilder animal, safe, and something from the level of the bird. Actually, I think in the parentheses, he actually does spell out a little more, now that I recall. The Rebbe Rashab does add. Let me stop for a moment here before I continue, because a lot has been said. Make sure everything is clear. If there are any questions, anything that need more, anything for me to elaborate on. So let me stop for you to ask anything.
I wanted to ask that, you might not like this question, but first of all, I wanted to say that the Klipa Gan Rog is coinable. That really excellent expression, Klipa Gan Rog, is materialism. But my question is, when the Rebbe says that nitzotzos, we finished with that, what does that mean to you?
I'd rather discuss that afterwards, because since it's not the theme here, I like to not over-process. It's a good question. It's a legitimate question. I'm not in any way denying that, but I'd rather, if you don't mind, when we finish the class, I'll comment on that.
Thanks.
Just I don't want to confuse matters. But it's a good question, yeah. So, any other questions on what we've just established? Okay, so in the parentheses, he says, Yesh Lema. This is the Rebbe Rashab's addition to the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, just for the record. Yesh Lema, says the Rebbe Rashab, the Zeu HaMidah Sheba Adam. Now remember, I have to clarify further. In Perek Tes of Tanya, chapter 9, when he starts explaining the battle between the divine soul and the animal soul, so for all practical purposes, the Pnei Adam is like Nefesh Elikis. The other three is Nefesh Habamis. So he says there that the place of where the nefesh habamis resides is the left side of the heart, the source of the blood. And he explains, because the blood is the passionate emotions, you can call it the impulsive emotions, and that is essentially the core personality of an animal soul. Unguided and untamed and not directed, the animal soul follows its impulses. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, I'm selfish, I'm greedy. That's the animal soul in its purest form. Needs to eat, it eats. Needs to sleep, it sleeps. It does not have the reflection. The divine soul, on the other hand, the mishkan of the nefesh halikis, is b'meyach sheba adam, and from there to the right side of the heart that he says is not the place of where the blood is produced. Because the mind is a reflective mind. The mind can say to the animal soul, 1 second, right now we're not eating. We're going to be learning Torah. Or we're going to eat with a kavanah to serve Hashem. The mind is reflective, and the mind is able to step back from the subjectivity of human emotions. Now, of course, that's the avodah. There's battle, and should be moyach shalat alalev. That the mind should control the impulses of the heart. Control. We're not saying eliminate. We're saying to harness, to direct. Very much like we learned in the Maimer Hamagbi, that the psila, the wick of the divine soul, absorbs the oil of the animal soul, the seichel of the animal soul, the shemen, and directs it to become a flame of God, a ner Hashem. Avaki rishbei eish, a fiery love of a haftas Hashem lekech. But that's through avodah. On its own, the guf and nefesh habamis are essentially mides that, left on its own to its own accord, will just follow its own impulses, whatever it wants. So he's saying that these three levels in the nefesh habamis, behema, chaya, and oif, yeshlem edezeu hamidas sheba adam, shegam nefesh habamis yesh bei kol hamidas. Because we know that nefesh habamis has in it all the emotions, like we learn in Tanya as well. Just like the nefesh halikis has 10 faculties, the nefesh habamis also has 10 faculties. However, the faculties are directed by the nefesh habamis on its own to its own interests. So it has all the midas. Actually, in Torah in the Maimer Magbi explains that's what's called Yetzer Hara. Yetzer Hara, people ask, what's the difference between the animal soul, nefesh habamis, and Yetzer Hara? Nefesh habamis is the whole nefesh, from Chachma through Malchus, all the 10 faculties. Yetzer Hara is the 7 emotions of the nefesh habamis. So Yetzer Hara is basically a part of the nefesh habamis, but specifically Yetzer leva adam, the 2 sides of the heart. The heart is emotions. So nefesh habamis also has a moyach, but the moyach is not the controlling force. The moyach is all about satisfying the emotions. So the nefesh habamis says kol hamidus. The zeu sha'adam keil kama pu'ula shenis. And this is what we see a human being as opposed to an animal that has only one, or usually one predisposition, one feature or one quality. A human being is keil kama pu'ulas. He has many different qualities. And I'll explain in a moment. Based commission kosav b'sefer b'ches prokim la Rambam. There's a sefer. The Rambam composed a book, a work, I should say, called the 8 chapters of the Rambam. It's printed in Gemara in the back of Masechta Avos, called Ches Prokim La Rambam. He talks about. So he says there that difference between an animal is that an animal like a nesher, for example, is a rachamon. It has compassion. What other bird? He brings a pnei. Another animal is a very aggressive, a very cruel animal, cruel bird. What was it? The name of the bird? What's the name of the bird? There's the nesher, and there's the. It'll come to me. I think the crow, or the. I say a crow in Hebrew.
Orev.
Orev, yeah. Orev is a crow. it's considered, it has midas achzorius. It's even cruel with its own children. A nesher is very compassionate. So it says, the Rambam says, animals usually have one midah, not 7 midas. Either chesed or gvura. A human being encompasses all. We have chesed, gvura, teferes, and so on. That's what he's referring to here. So he says, shezeu gam benefesh hativi, that this is also in the natural soul. Vayim masha kosa b'lkuta teira b'dibra maschel kisavoyu the pasha nesachim. It's in Pasha Shlach. Okay. So l'kuta teira, I believe he discusses that. So what do we have from this? That the nefesh habamis is not one feature. He's trying to explain why it has in it both chaya, behema chaya, and oif. Lefizet tzarich lemer shegam b'nefesh habamis yes shris. So okay, one second before I read that. So therefore, the nefesh habamis is multi-dimensional, basically, has different features in it. So it has. So he doesn't spell out what the behema is, what the chaya, what the oif is, but he does explain that nefesh habamis has several dimensions, and that's how it's. And now he's adding one more point in this parentheses. And based on this, we have to say, Shagam benefesh habamis, that also in the animal soul, yes yisun ala malachim. So we're talking here how the malachim are supporting and helping us. But you have to say the neshamas have a maila malachim. Why? Bezeh sheyesh boi kol amidas. Because the malachim also, like animals, have only one midah. Like a mechol is midas hachesed. Malach Gavriel is gvura. Rafal is teferes. So like we know that a malach, when it comes down below, every malach only has one shlichus. Why? Why can't you send? Why did Hashem have to send 3 angels to Avram and Sarah? One to tell them, one to help heal Avram, one to help tell them about the birth of Yitzchak, one to destroy Sdoim, one and to save Lot. Why couldn't he send one angel? Send one messenger to do all 3 jobs. So Rashi brings there, and it's brought from Chazal, because a malach could only do one shlichus. Because malachim are very powerful, but they have one kav. Each one does their work. They don't cross other kavim. I don't know if any of you play chess, but the Rebbe in a Sikha in Tavshin Ches in 1948, which is now published and edited, actually prepared it. The Rebbe explains the chess pieces and the game of chess in Avedis Hashem. So he says, in chess, the chess pieces, as we know, there's the king, there's the queen, and then there are the ministers, which we call the rook, right? The horse and the bishop. And those 3, they all have a path. Like, for example, a rook can go straight, either direction. A bishop goes diagonally in any direction on its color. And a horse, even a horse, goes also 2 and 1 step. And that's the only way it can go. So he says that's malachim. They can go far, but they only stay in one kav. So the bishop, for example, on the white can never go to the black, can never move to black. It doesn't have the ability to do so. Whereas the king and queen could move anywhere, and a pawn cannot move everywhere, but everything is one step, but it can go one step to the next step, from black to white and so on, which is the simple foot soldiers. The Rebbe, it's a beautiful sikha where he explains all the pieces in Avedis Hashem. But the point I wanted to make here is that malachim each have their own midah. So he's saying that even though we're going to learn the neshamas are receiving from malachim, but on the other hand, because the neshamas have kol hamidus, the whole structure, like we said before, shir kaima, the whole structure, and that's why they have pnei chaya, and they have pnei nesher, and they have pnei behema, pnei shoyer. So they have a mila over the malachim as well. Just adding that little foot in that last line in the parentheses. Okay. Elo shehema klulim. Let's just continue. It's continuing still. This is all the mimer of Yosef Avenu of the Alter Rebbe. Elo shehema klulim beruchni is the nefesh hamaskelis. So going back to before the parentheses, these 3 levels of the nefesh habamis are encompassed in the spirituality of the nefesh hamaskelis. Nefesh hamaskelis is the nefesh of seichel. Now, whether he means the seichel of the nefesh habamis, or does he mean the 3rd soul called nefesh hasichlis, not clear to me. But regardless, it's a level higher than midas. So there is seichel in the nefesh habamis. Explains that in the Maimer Hamagbi, because the nefesh habamis seichel, however, is focused on its midas, on its needs. But there is seichel. That's why it's called. That's why the nefesh habamis has all 10 faculties. But let's see where he's going with this. Because the root of the nefesh adam is from the pnei adam. Even though it manifests inside of a nefesh habamis, which is rooted in the other three, the face of the pnei sher, the pnei nesher, and pnei aryeh. Yes, so the sherish of the nefesh adam is pnei adam, the face of the person, sheber Merkavah da'asiyah, shekel hakel. And we know that that fourth face is not just a fourth face, it encompasses all of them, like the pasuk says, pnei adam la'arba asar. So the interesting twist is that after saying there are four different faces, the face of a person, the face of an eagle, the face of a behemoth, of a sher, of a bull, and the face of a lion, it says all of them were in the image of a face of a person. So there's different opinions in the commentaries what that means, but basically they're like if you would draw it or you would sculpt it, you would see animal, but you'd see the animals within the visage of a human face, because it encompasses all of them. In the case of our lives, our nefesh halikis, the nefesh adam, manifests inside the nefesh habamis, and they therefore have both elements. There's a pnei adam in there, but there's also a pnei behema, and a pnei nesher, and a pnei sher. Well, the zehatam, you see again, if you really are clear, if you're able to pick up the language, you see this is not the Rebbe Rashab's natural language. This is Alter Rebbe's language. This is the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe didn't write this. His Manichim wrote it. Maybe his brother or the Mitler Rebbe, maybe. I'm not sure. I have to look up. Or maybe even the Tzemach Tzedek. I have to look it up. But bottom line is, that's why it's much more dense than usual. So he says not like this. Well, the Zehatam. And this is now the reason. That's why we need Malachim. After explaining the process of how the nefesh habamis works and how it interacts with the nefesh adam, like we just said, the pnei adam. So he says that's the reason that the person needs to be mamshich on his nefesh habahamis. So his animal soul, he needs to draw down into the animal soul. Since it's rooted in and makeh chetzva. Chetzva means like sculpted from, chiseled. Chetzva is the word chiseled from the Merkavah of okay, he calls it now Asiya. Not, I said before Bria. It's Merkavah of Asiya. That's where the Nefesh Habamis is rooted. Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Nesher. Not sure why he only brings those two, but that's what he brought earlier as well. So since it's rooted there and chiseled from there, so that's why you need to be mamshich on the Nefesh Habamis if you want to so-called soften and prime and prepare the Nefesh Habamis to be able to come to Shema and reach Ava V'yira. You can't just jump. So the first thing you need to do is to be mamshich into the klippas nega, like we said, of the Asiya, nega of Asiya, where Nefesh Habamis is coming from, which is rooted in these three faces of the Pnei Sher, Pnei Nesher, and Pnei Aryeh. Shehein HaMalochim, the Asiya, those are connected to the Malochim of Asiya. So till now he hasn't said that explicitly, but right now he's saying that these four different, or three we should say, these three faces of the Merkavah is actually the Malochim of Asiya, HaMashpiyim Ava V'yira, that are Mashpiyah Ava V'yira. So if you want to start affecting the animal soul, you have to first draw from its root in the Merkavah, which is the Malochim of Asiya. And they are Mashpiyah Ava V'yira, so they help so-called soften, that's the word I'm using, and prepare the animal soul. V'hu ha'esh shel maila shenimshech al hanefesh habamis. So the Eish, that's like the fire from above that's drawn onto the animal soul. Now the animal soul itself is Eish, but it's the Eish passion for Elam Hazeh, for materialism. But since it's rooted in the Malachim, or we could say the Pnei Merkavah, the faces of the Merkavah, So just like when they brought a carbon on the Mizbeach, what happened? A fire from above came and consumed it. Same thing here, that you're being mamshich on the Nefesh Habamis by saying Birchis Yetzer about the Malachim. We're being mamshich on the Nefesh Habamis and Eish Shel Maila, so that it should affect the animal soul, that it's and direct and harness it toward Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem. So this, of course, is an addition of the Rebbe Rashab. Like he explains in the Hemshech Samach Vav, I believe it's in the maybe Shmois Maimer, I have to look it up. Ki ha-nefesh habamis ma'akeves u'menas es ha-nefesh halikis. Because the animal soul on its own blocks. Ma'akeves, it's like ikuv. It's an obstacle that blocks u'menas and stops and resists es ha-nefesh halikis. The nefesh halikis is affected by the nefesh habamis. If you don't do anything with the nefesh habamis, like we said, the nefesh habamis, nefesh halikis are joined as one. The soul is not the soul as it's higher than a body. The soul has entered into a body, into an animal soul. So what do you do with animal soul? You can't ignore it because it's constantly demanding its needs. So you have to do something with it. So on its own, it's ma'akev v'menes and nefesh liyas lo yispailas ha'ava. It's stopping it from having the passion, or the excitement, the stimulation of love. So it would be very nice if we only had a nefesh halikis. Of course, the nefesh halikis would be constantly searching and longing and connecting to God. But the problem is we have a nefesh habamis, and the soul, the nefesh halikis, has entered inside the nefesh habamis. Nefesh habamis has its own interests. Again, you don't need a proof. Just ask yourself. Every second of the day, your nefesh habamis is beckoning and wants attention. It wants to be taken care of. So even though your divine soul is also speaking to you, even if it's speaking loudly, you still have to reckon with the animal soul. So therefore, what do you do with all that? So therefore, you need to do something to tame, to lower the volume, to somewhat subdue the passions of the animal soul, to be me'er ava yirah nefesh habamis. And where does that come from? Mesherish mokar chetzva, from the root of the place it was chiseled from. So that's where the malachim come in and the Merkavah come in. They, by invoking their love for Hashem, the nefesh habamis responds to that, even though it doesn't recognize it directly, but it's like showing the nefesh habamis, you come from here. And this is like, it's like telling the nefesh habamis, you originate from this level, and therefore, time to listen. That's the Aveda Birchis Yetzer. L'chein eitza yi'utza. This is again the Rebbe, Alter Rebbe's language. And that's why I was given this advice, was advised to us. Ma'anshe Knesset Agdela. From the men of the great assembly. This is the sages that we learn about, right? The beginning of Pirkei Avos, where he says, Moshe Kibbel Torah Mesinem, Asara Yeshua, L'Skenim, Skenim L'Neviim, Leviim, L'Anshe Knesset Agdela. They're the men of the great assembly, the beginning before the Tanoim. They're the ones that established many of our prayers. So they give us this advice. And Eitzah, Lema Shtayim Lefaneha, to say two psukim before, two prayers, I should say, two brachas before Shema. Lahaske Kedushas HaMalachim, to speak about, to mention, and describe the Kedusha of the Malachim when they say Kaddish, 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 in order to inspire that Ava V'Yirah, so it should affect the animal soul. That's why they established these two brachas before, Birchis Yetzer and Birchis Avaselam. He doesn't talk about Birchis Avaselam here, but I think in the middle of Rebbe's Maimer he does. But bottom line is, it talks about Birchis Yetzer, says the two brachas, L'Shtayim Lefaneha, Shayidezeh Nasa Hazoza Primius. That causes a shake-up. Hazoza is like a shift. It's a strong word. It means to move something from its locked place. It essentially disrupts and shifts, an inner shift, b'nefesh habamis. In the nefesh habamis, shehu inyan hachkika mebifnim. That's called the chiseling from within. This is commission is ill. We learned earlier there's a chiseling from without. It's like when a sculptor chisels a piece of material, wants to turn it into, let's say, a piece of furniture. So there's the chiseling on the outside. That's more the polishing of it. The chiseling on the inside really gives it its very inner form and shape. So it's called chkikim mebifnim. So in other words, to weaken and soften, and you can say to start shaping the animal soul and harnessing it, the Anshe Knesset Daily give us this tremendous advice. Start with that. That'll weaken I should say that will begin to direct the animal soul. So then when you say Shema, it'll be receptive. So the Malachim's role is not for the Nefesh Elikis at this point. He's soon going to explain that it also helps for the Nefesh Elikis. Right now it's for the Nefesh Abamis. And then afterwards, when we say Krishma, Tuchel HaNefesh Elikis, that Nefesh Elikis is capable, is able, Lishtaba Begufa Demalka, to connect and bind itself to the body of the king. Like we said before, that's what neshamas do through Shema. They can do that, but the problem is they have to contend with an animal soul. So comes the Birchas Yetzer, the brachas before Shema, to help us achieve that. Shehu Mokar Chetzva Canal. That's the Mokar Chetzva. What's the root? Where's the Nefesh Elikis chiseled from? That's the Shtab of the Gufa de Malka. That's rooted in Atzmus, like we learned earlier. Canal. So the Nefesh Elikis has that power. The problem is it has an obstacle, a miniyah ve'ikuv of the animal soul. And that's the role of the malachim. And that answers the question. Why do we need the malachim when the neshamas are higher than malachim, higher than dibur, and they connect directly to the source? Because you have to deal with the nefesh habams. The next piece is the ads, which I think I'll leave that for tomorrow. He's going to say that also the malachim also help the nefesh elikis. That's another point which we'll discuss in the next class. I'm going to stop right here before the vagam, because I want to give it more time to really digest and also explain, and then we'll go to the next piece. I'm going to stop here. Floor is yours if anyone wants to ask anything.
I just want to say, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. Yeah. It gives you a whole different understanding of tefillah, of the prayers. You know, we say every day, Birchas Yetzer, the brachas before Shema, and this exactly. It's a whole understanding of a real process.
But it's incredible that not very, very, a lot of us, or even though all these crazy things are taking place, we don't really feel it though. And I understand it's a work in progress and you have to refine yourself. I get that aspect, but I don't know of anybody that really feels this, even though there's crazy stuff going around, when you're saying these words.
So I'll tell you what I would suggest. Next time you're davening Shachris in the minyan and they come to Birchas Yetzer, they usually go over it, how quickly? Within
Correct.
10 seconds,
2 seconds.
It's usually over. So maybe you should stop everyone and say, everyone stop for a moment. Right now, we have the capacity to chisel and to refine the animal soul, but we got to do this slowly. There's no way you can achieve this without a little kavanah. If you just knock off the words, Kaddish, 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 and Birchas Yetzer, you're not going to get very far, let's be honest. This is a hisbonenus.
Yeah.
I once saw a chassid davening, and I saw before he got to Shema, he spent, I don't know, maybe an hour. And now when you learn this, you understand what he was thinking about.
Wow.
So what should I say to you? It's all, let's use business terminology. It's only when you invest that you get returns.
Yeah.
Can I say?
Well said.
I wish you could just press a button, but
it's crazy.
Well, the real problem is we don't daven properly. I always call it the lost art of prayer.
So true.
And you really can't. Also, you can't understand the tefillas if you don't really learn chassidus and understand the kavanah. Because even if you know the words, what they mean, why are we talking about malachim altogether? Why do we need to know about the malach? I mean, it's a nice image. Malachim are singing and praising.
This Indian of Hakika Mebifnim, I think you said it. It's essentially a sort of a partial transformation of the Nefesh Bahamas, sort of separating it, I guess, from Gashmias.
Well, it's literally it's taking raw matter
yeah,
and refining it. You're turning it into something that becomes more edel, more refined. That's really what it means.
Mm-hmm. Because it also seems like it means to get it out of the way. So it's kind of like those are two different concepts.
First of all, the fact that it blocks as an obstacle doesn't mean you're getting it out of the way. It means you're doing something to it that it shouldn't be a block and obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
So you can refine something. Listen, if you want to, let's say you're carving, you're trying to dig and create a tunnel, but you hit a hard rock, and it's right in the way. You can't get through. So you chisel to the point where you make it enough that it should become part of the channel. So that's how you see. You have to look at that and look at it more like you're like chiseling the raw materialism and carving it to the carving is a good word as well, to turn it into the proper keli. Just like I said before about a keli. If you take a raw piece of matter, it's not going to serve a keli. When you dig it out, you make sure it becomes it has the space to contain, let's say, wine or some other liquid. That's the idea. You're taking the nefesh habamis and you're getting it out of its raw, obstinate chaimer, a raw, obstinate ego, if you wish, or whatever you want to, however you call it. That's how you have to see it. I mean, the example I gave for this when we learned it the first time is the example was like if you were to watch someone daven properly, and you see them crying, you see them sweating. I mean, you see them really working on themselves. The nefesh habamis would have an effect. We affected by that, not just the nefesh halakis. So in a way, what we're saying here is when we read about the malachim and you properly concentrated on it, and the nefesh habamis is listening, it may not be interested initially, but what you're doing is exposing the nefesh habamis to something. It's like almost singing a song, and the nefesh habamis says that's a beautiful song. So the nefesh habamis, remember, is not evil. Nefesh habamis is selfish, but not evil. It means it's self-consumed, but it could become shemen. The whole point is that you can turn it into oil, because nefesh habamis has seichel. I'll be very honest. When I teach, when I communicate, what I'm trying to do is to engage someone's animal soul, not just their divine soul. Obviously, you touch the divine soul, but you want also that their nefesh habamis says, this is enjoyable. This is meaningful. This is something I want to be engaged in. Because if you can get the nefesh habamis interested, then you're going to be successful. If you don't, it's going to be a battle. So what you want is always to inspire the nefesh habamis. So in a way, in very simple English, this is one of the ways to inspire by saying to them. Now, why does the nefesh habamis respond? Because it's rooted there. It may not know that, but the fact is that it is rooted there. So that's what he's saying. It's almost like, again, if you sing a beautiful song, nefesh habamis hears it. If you sang a song that only the nefesh halakis could understand, it's not for the nefesh habamis. So you need something that speaks on its terms. That's somewhat turning this a little more, I guess, more practical.
Beautiful. I was just kidding. You just said it. It's sort of leading into Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. It seems.
No, it will be that. Exactly that. That is correct. Yeah. It is that. We will learn that. Yes.
Beautiful.
Okay. So let's stop here, almost before the end of the paragraph on page 1444.